A novel manga and anime series about a virtual reality MMORPG where players end up trapped inside because the crazy developer disabled the logout function. And in order to get out, they have to defeat the final boss. And if they die in the game, they also die in real life. The main protagonist is Kirito, who prefers to do things lone wolf style, single player in an MMO setting, a bit odd. And he's a bit of a power gamer with a pretty high level character. And he's also somewhat socially awkward. In other words, the ultimate nerd. He obtains the sword called Elucidator, a level 50 drop, pretty powerful. Supposedly a one-handed longsword, which is a very common misnomer. An actual longsword would be something like this, designed primarily for two-handed use. At first I was going to make a joke about how the Elucidator is somewhat confused, has a bit of an identity crisis, doesn't really know what it wants to be, one-handed or two-handed sword. If you go by the blade length, and of course the classification inside the game, in the anime, it's a one-handed sword. But the grip is definitely that of a two-handed sword. But at the same time, there is also the good old Langmesser, which is an actual historical sword, well, knife. They actually called this long knife, which is the same kind of thing. It's a one-handed blade length, and the historical techniques were also mainly for one-handed use. But at the same time, you can see that the grip clearly offers you enough space for two-handed use as well, if the need arises. So it is a bit of a hybrid, I suppose. It can be whatever it wants to, or rather whatever the user wants to. So either way, it doesn't matter too much. Of course, it's a little weird to evaluate the practicality of a fantasy sword in a video game inside a fictional story. It's a little convoluted, but well, people were interested in it, asked me to do it, so here we go. The general design is definitely not one of the worst I've seen. I mean, there are pretty crazy things, of course, in fantasy. This here is not the most practical design you could come up with, but it's not bad either. And by the way, before anyone mentions Men-at-Arms, yes, I've seen the video. I'm aware of the reproduction of the Elucidator. But the thing is, smashing glass and stabbing the blade into a hay bale doesn't really tell you anything about whether or not it's practical. And they did seem to struggle a little bit with it. Seeing how they swung it, it looked like it was not too well balanced and too heavy. But those things can be fixed. The thing is, a good swordsmith who wants to make an actual fighting weapon has ways of adjusting the weight and balance to make a